Let me start by welcoming all of you to this plenary session, promoting inclusive trade through gender empowerment. Let me start also by welcoming the distinguished panelists. We have ministers here with us and also other very distinguished and prominent figures of international organizations. So I want to extend to them a very warm welcome. So ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, good morning. Welcome to the second day of the Global Review. And before I even start, I would like to thank Anush for bringing the room to order and for being the WTO's first gender focal point. And she helps to coordinate all our work on these issues. She's doing, by the way, a great job. So thanks, Anush. This session is looking at inclusiveness through the lens of gender empowerment. And I think the debate on gender issues is more vibrant than it has been for many, many years. It was high on the agenda of the G20 in Hamburg last week. It was quite striking, I have to tell you, looking around the table. And this was a topic of conversation actually there. So out of the 32 people who were sitting at the table in Hamburg, only 4 were women. So it's a reminder of how far we still have to go. And it underlines the importance of this conversation today. There is no doubt that trade plays an important role in gender empowerment. It creates job opportunities, it provides better salaries, it encourages education and skills development, and it helps to increase financial independence. Now, tradable sectors are large sources of employment for female workers. In developing countries, companies that export employ more women than those that don't. And let me give you just a few figures on this. In Rwanda, 74% of those engaged in cross-border trade are women. And 90% of those rely solely on the cross-border trade as their income source. In Cambodia, 86% of silk industry employees are women. And in China, 55% of digital entrepreneurs are women. So this is all, of course, very positive, but big imbalances still persist. Overall, women are underrepresented in international trade. For example, only 1 in 5 exporting firms is led by a female entrepreneur. In addition, various barriers hamper women entrepreneurs in accessing international markets. So let me give you just a few examples of those. First, legal and regulatory barriers are higher for women. So in many economies, female entrepreneurs face more obstacles than their male counterparts. And that ranges from obtaining credit and registering property to some very simple and basic things like just opening a bank account. In 155 out of 190 economies studied by the World Bank, women do not have the same legal rights as men. So this means that in 154 out of 190 countries, there is at least one law that is impeding women equal economic opportunities. So these legal regulatory issues are the first kind of barrier that I wanted to mention. The second one is access to capital. So this is a major obstacle to women in building a business, not least as they often have less collateral. Moreover, some countries require women to have their husband's authorization to start a bank account or register a business. And these are, as you can imagine, major impediments. Moving on, the third barrier that I wanted to mention is that gender biases can sometimes result in greater risks and unfavorable working conditions for women. Research has found that at some border crossing points, women are disproportionately harassed and ask for bribes. They don't ask bribes from men, but they do from women. Now, we should also know that gender biases occur everywhere. So this is not something that only the small countries or the less developed countries. No, this happens everywhere. A survey of Canadian women-owned SME exporters, found that 75% of them, so 3 in 4 of those entrepreneurs, found that they perceived a lack of respect by male business owners and a refusal to be taken seriously. Now, of course, let me stress the point that we're not here saying that the Canadians are biased against women. That's not the point. Quite the opposite. In fact, I think Canada is showing a real leadership in confronting the persistent issues of unconscious biases that we have in all of our societies. Now, of course, the fact that these biases are unconscious, that makes them even harder to address. Now, let me turn to one final barrier that I wanted to mention, which is knowledge and skills. And of course, this is not the final barrier. This is one that I want to mention. Low levels of literacy are more prevalent among female than male traders. The same applies to awareness about cross-border trade regulations and procedures. So this is an area where capacity building support could have a particularly important and direct impact. We need to work together to lower these barriers and wherever possible to eliminate them. Doing that would contribute not only to the economic empowerment of women, but also to overall economic growth and social development in economies. The World Bank shows that the elimination of discrimination against women workers and managers would raise the per capita productivity by 40%. 40%, so that's huge. Now, so we must act, and there is a range of practical things that we can do. By empowering the smaller entrepreneurs, we can make a direct impact on women's participation in trade. SMEs are a major source of employment for women. In emerging markets, up to 40% of SMEs are owned by women. Aid for Trade puts a significant focus on SME internationalization, of course, as you know. In fact, Aid for Trade support for SME development has risen by around 50% between 2005 and 2013. Another area where the initiative can make a big difference is by helping to bridge the digital divide. Facilitating e-commerce can dramatically lower the barriers to trading for women everywhere. The Internet provides women entrepreneurs with easier and less expensive ways of accessing foreign markets. Fully realizing these opportunities requires, of course, better connectivity, infrastructure, and that has to be paired with the necessary skills and training. So with all such actions, appropriate data is vital to ensure that we're moving in the right direction. The reality is that we don't have enough data to assess the impact of all these barriers, all these things on women. So there is insufficient information at present to track precisely this link between trade and gender. The WTO recently launched a short brochure on gender-aware trade policy, which is available here today. And we are also looking to produce a deeper, more comprehensive publication on these issues. So watch out for that. The Aid for Trade at a Glance report that we launched yesterday, so that's the title, Aid for Trade at a Glance. It was launched yesterday, and it also puts a focus here. It highlights some of the divides that prevent women from fully reaping the benefits of international trade. And on a more positive note, it also shows how the gender dimension is increasingly integrated into trade and development programs. For example, almost 90% of donors are now integrating women's economic empowerment into their Aid for Trade programming. So that's very good news. So this is progress. But of course, there is much more that we can do to make the trade system more inclusive. Action has to come from all quarters, from our organizations, our communities, our families, and ourselves. At the WTO, we're looking for ways to raise awareness, streamline gender into our capacity building programs, and enhance in-house cooperation on gender and trade. As I mentioned at the outset, for the first time in the organization's history, we have appointed a focal point on gender precisely to champion these issues. Of course, men also need to be a part of this effort. We want to bring men's voices into the conversation, and I'm glad to see that we have some gender balance on our panel today. I, of course, am willing to be a part of this effort. The WTO will remain committed. So in conclusion, let me leave you with one thought. At the start of my remarks, I mentioned that the gender balance among the leaders of the G20 was less than perfect, to say the least. So let me quote another inspiring leader that I have had the pleasure of meeting and working closely with during her country's accession to the WTO. And by the way, a leader that just happens also to be a woman. And I'm talking about President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia. And she said, "The size of your dreams must always exceed your current capacity to achieve them. If your dreams do not scare you, they're not big enough." So that's a fantastic quote, I think, from that leader. So let's be ambitious. Together, we can work to break down all of these barriers and ensure that women everywhere can use trade as a springboard for their economic empowerment. So let me thank you once again. Let me thank the panel for being here, for their contribution that I'm sure will be great. And I do wish that you have a very productive session. Thank you very much. Good work.